Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news, the ongoing reform of the electricity sector, as well as the outlook for the broader transition came into focus this week. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss some of the developments. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
Concerns have been raised about signs that the reform momentum may be stalling.
Yes, I think this came out over the last few weeks. There's been this battle over the transmission system operator and whether the assets should be transferred to this new independent state-owned entity or whether they should remain within an NTCSA, which is an Eskom subsidiary. And there's been a sort of a public spat around this between the BLSA CEO, Busi Mavusa, and the chairman of Eskom, Nyati. And it's been it's sort of it's indication of a number of issues that are, or a symbol of a number of issues that are going on in the electricity space at the moment. And BLSA also has a tracker. So for the first time since they've tracked the reforms, which they do like over 270 action plans around the reforms, and they measure those, for the first time it's turned negative. And if you look at why it's turned negative, it's largely about what's happening in the electricity space. And I think very much we're in the sort of business end here of the reforms of the electricity, in the electricity supply industry. And it's complicated and it has serious implications. So there's some caution, I think, being thrown up. There's this sort of lack of a clear policy direction relative to what is in Eskom's interests, because we have the same minister. They coincide. The minister is not just the policy minister. The minister is also the shareholder minister. So I think there's a bit of a conflict of interest there. But generally, these are very complicated questions that we're now answering. And the tracker, for instance, around virtual wheeling and not allowing traders to operate in that space, the slow pace of reform in the distribution sector is a big issue. We're seeing at the moment, because Eskom's recovered operationally, during periods of the day, we've got 5 gigawatts of surplus capacity, which is being curtailed. And basically, Eskom is curtailing the publicly procured renewables plants, but they aren't, and that's a normal process of curtailment, and there's a payment linked to that, but they're not transferring the money at the pace that's normal. So there's now 2 billion sort of backlog of payments outstanding. So there's a number of issues that I think are coming to the fore. NERSA has got a huge amount of regulation that they're having to go through that have big implications from sort of the market operator, the market code, as we move towards the wholesale market was supposed to be launched in April. They missed that deadline. Now there's talk about getting this done before the end of Eskom's financial year, which is, the end of March next year. So there's a number of, bottlenecks starting to develop around the reform process. And this is very much reflected in this latest BLSA tracker, which is turned negative. And as I say, very much because of the sort of slowdown in the electricity space.
The pace of the reforms will affect the energy transition as well as the timelines for retiring coal plants.
Yes, and this also came to the fore at the Coal and Energy Transition Day that happened this week, where the Eskom CEO, Dan Marikane, spoke to this and said, we've got 6 power stations that are meant to close by April 2030, and another 2 that are supposed to close by 2034. And there needs to be attention given to whether South Africa is going to be in a position to do that. We know that they operate outside the law in terms of minimum emission standards. They don't meet the minimum emission standards. And it's going to involve something like 300 billion rand to get the plant into that sort of position where they're not polluting at the level where they fall outside, the regulations. So that we know that Eskom doesn't have that money. So we're going to get to a point now where we have to make a decision. Do we have enough? We've definitely got enough energy in the system, but do we have enough capacity in the system to back that up? So we're curtailing 5 gigawatts every day because there's a lot of solar that's come in, but we need to balance that solar with flexible generators. And the easiest and quickest are battery energy storage, and the prices are coming down. But you need to have processes in place to send the right price signals so that those can be procured, and the market's not in place. We've got very slow procurement processes. We've seen how slow the gas to power procurement has been. There should be some movement in the next few months around preferred bidders there. Eskom has a EIA problem with its Richards Bay gas to power plant. So there's a number of things that aren't going to be in place by 2030. So therefore Eskom says, by September they're going to give a revised decommissioning plan. So this is going to be watched very carefully, because we've also got our nationally determined contributions in terms of our carbon emission cuts. But we also know the world has changed, and there's a real focus now on energy sovereignty and security, despite what we're seeing around the negative feedback loops that are starting to happen around climate change. When these normal seasonal events happen now, these are being amplified, and we're seeing a massive impacts in the north at the moment or northern hemisphere at the moment, around fires, around droughts. And we're seeing that these are being much more intense than they have in the past. We know that we're in an El Niño event, and there's a fear that this is going to be amplified also in South Africa, and we'll have to see how our weather patterns play out this summer. But so despite this intensifying pressure on the climate side, there's also this lag that we've had in terms of putting in the investment that we need to mitigate and to start closing down our coal-fired power stations. So I think unfortunately the smart money is on a coal plant extension.
The potential for using electricity from rooftop solar to lower municipal costs is also receiving some attention.
Yeah, so this is not really part of the reform agenda, but there's been some very interesting work by Perry, and they put out a report into the pent-up supply that comes from rooftop solar that basically businesses and residents have put in, and that was put in an intense and a rapid way during those very difficult load-shedding years from about 2021 to about 2024. And we had a massive increase in the amount of rooftop solar that was deployed. And here again, a lot of that energy gets curtailed or just gets not used, because at midday, that's not when the system is needing it. And the households can only take so much of that and store so much in their batteries. And this report basically shows that if the municipalities, particularly in Gauteng, where this fleet has already been deployed by residents, if they could tap into that and buy this at a much cheaper rate than they would at Megaflex. And some residents have even indicated you can take it for free if you don't change my tariff structure, because the tariff structures now are having less and less variable and more fixed costs. And that's really making it difficult for residents to justify even remaining on the grid. So we're getting to the point where we'd rather put in a few more solar panels and some more batteries if you've got the means and defect, rather than maybe using this energy effectively, where it would be much cheaper for the electricity to buy that bulk from us. Obviously, they can use some of it during the day, but then there would need to be some sort of battery storage incentive, I think, and leasing that from the private sector, again at a cheaper cost, to deploy that during the evening and morning peaks. But that's not the mindset. The mindset is mostly oppositional, putting in tariff structures that are really going to force grid defection, are going to accelerate the municipal distributors' death spiral. And they're saying, look at this cleverly, look at the way that you can actually benefit from this, incentivize actually people to add more to their roof so that you get more of this cheap bulk electricity, but then obviously we'd need the batteries in place. So there's a number of, if we go full circle, there's a number of opportunities to accelerate the transition to lower the costs for municipalities. But these require different mindset, I think, from the political and economic leaders in the country. And it also requires the regulatory support. That there's a big backlog there. But also, and I think we need Eskom to show its agency in the transition, not just to be a oppositional force. It has a lot of agency around being able to build grid, foster, put out the fires that are stopping the transition from happening, instead of saying, we can only just rely on the coal fleet after 2030. There are a number of things they could also be doing, but I think it really needs to come from the political and economic leadership now, that we need to have a better vision around the electricity supply industry and then drive the reforms that are needed to put that in place.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.